Which parts of the Memphis Grizzlies regular season schedule are the easiest and the toughest? And am I coming around on the NBA in-season tournament? Spoiler alert, probably not. But I am excited about one particular aspect. I'll break that down and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is so wonderful to be back with you. Dear listener, dear viewer, I have missed you terribly. It is I, Joe Mullinax, and I am your host for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much to my co-host, Michael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, picking up my slack as the busy part of my year begins, school and football season as a coach and all those sorts of things. To Michael doing a phenomenal job last week, picking up a couple of shows. I'm helping him out as he finishes up the golf tournament that finished up on Sunday there in Memphis. He's helping the Commercial Appeal with that. I've got you covered here on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, and I'm happy to do so. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are free and available here on Locked On Grizzlies as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, YouTube, make us a part each and every time an episode drops of your Memphis Grizzlies fan experience. Again, here in the dog days of the offseason, an episode every other day. So Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays through August, we will give you a show, 3 shows a week, and I have the Monday edition of the program, obviously. But again, if you already subscribe on YouTube, you check us out there. Thank you so much for being with us. If you are an audio fan listening on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you might be getting this podcast, we appreciate that too. Hopefully you subscribe in more than one place, taking to Michael and I with you wherever you go. We are grateful for that here on Locked On Grizzlies. In my time away, right, I missed the last couple of episodes. The regular season schedule came out, right? And DeMichael did a phenomenal job on his most recent edition of the show, talking about the ins and outs and the basics of the schedule because it literally just released. We had a chance over the weekend to take a look at it a little bit more in depth, and I have some takeaways in terms of the easiest and the toughest stretches of the schedule for the Memphis Grizzlies. And I'm going to preface all of this by saying that for me, what makes the NBA schedule tough is travel. Even though traveling has never been easier, thanks to technology and all of those sorts of things, the quality of travel is certainly much better. But with that in mind, it's still a lot, jumping time zones, going to different cities and different days. And that's going to be a focus of mine as I talk about ease and difficulty, because there might be times where Memphis is on the road, but the road trip maybe isn't as intense in terms of distances being covered. Obviously, the quality of the opponent matters as well, but we have to keep in mind that we assume that the Denver Nuggets will be pretty good, right? Nikola Jokic still exists. We assume that the Boston Celtics, the Dallas Mavericks, these teams will still have pretty solid campaigns. The Oklahoma City Thunder, Minnesota Timberwolves, on and on and on I could go. But injuries happen. Teams unexpectedly struggle. The Memphis Grizzlies are a great example of that, right? Nobody foresaw Memphis falling as hard as they did last season. Logic stands to lead us to the idea that it's likely that's going to happen to somebody else, hopefully not the Memphis Grizzlies again. So while I take into account home and away, I take into account stretches of long times of play. That's what I look at. Rest, how many back-to-backs. That matters more to me than the opponent necessarily. So the opponents matter, but I'm looking at the actual travel and schedule itself when I talk about easiest and hardest. And that leads me to my first takeaway in terms of ease from this schedule. The Memphis Grizzlies play 6 games, 6 of their first 10, I believe, or 6 of their first, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They play 5 of their first 6 of their first 11 at home. Yeah, I had that right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 6 of their first 10 are at home. And that matters because of who they are playing against. They're playing against the likes of the Orlando Magic, the Chicago Bulls. They're playing the Brooklyn Nets twice. Brooklyn on the road, one of those games, and then Brooklyn at home. The Washington Wizards at home. There is a chance for Memphis early in the season to pick up some victories. Opening night against the Utah Jazz could figure to be a potential win considering how Utah, even though they just re-signed Lauri Markkanen, is not necessarily the strongest contender in the Western Conference. Orlando and Houston figure to be competitive. Chicago, who has any idea what they're trying to do there with the Bulls. And we mentioned Brooklyn a couple of times, the Washington Wizards. Anytime you face an Eastern Conference team that it is very likely that they are trying to tank, that is a squad that Memphis should be circling on the calendar and picking up wins, because the seeding in the Western Conference, a lot of that is going to be determined by how many of those types of wins you're able to pick up. There's not many teams out west that are actively tanking, right? The San Antonio Spurs, I wouldn't say they're actively tanking. They're just not going to be as good as the other teams. A lot of the teams out west are actively competing. Maybe Portland's the only team that's in the tank. How does that relate to what the Grizzlies are trying to do? Almost every night in the Western Conference is going to be brutal. Eastern Conference stretches, the Charlotte Hornets don't figure to be, maybe they're one of the teams that's improved, but it seems unlikely. The Toronto Raptors. Anytime Memphis is going against one of those Eastern Conference teams, they need to take advantage of that and rack up as many wins as they can get, because the West is so darn difficult to get through. Memphis has numerous homestands, right? They have varying lengths of the homestands. Of course, their longest homestand is 5 games, and there's also some 4-game homestands in there as well. The longest homestand is in February, and it's after the All-Star break, about a week or so. It starts Phoenix, New York, San Antonio, Atlanta, and Oklahoma City. None of those games are going to be cakewalks, right? Maybe Atlanta is the easiest game of the 5, but one of the important things to point out is there's only one back-to-back in that stretch, and that's the Friday-Saturday against New York and San Antonio. And again, San Antonio, if I'm giving them too much credit, maybe I am, that is a stretch of time, going back to my ease point that I was making. Memphis is getting up, going to practice in the same bed from literally February 25th through Wednesday, March 5th. So they have over a week where they get to stay at home, be comfortable, get into a groove. Coming out of the All-Star break, that's going to be really important. That's a good homestand for the Grizzlies. And I'm really excited to see where they are at that point, right? Because the trade deadline's right around that time. So where is Memphis aligning in terms of, have they made their move? Are they going to make a move? How they are peaking? That's a perfect time to get extra practice opportunities, to put some reps with potential new pieces under your belt, assuming Memphis makes that kind of a trade. Another, and I'm using the term easy loosely, okay? I'm using it loosely here. Another easy stretch, at least in terms of 5-game road trips, is a 5-game road trip that is broken up by the All-Star break. So what does that mean? Memphis on February 11th and 12th has a back-to-back against the Phoenix Suns and the LA Clippers. Most certainly not going to argue that that is an easy back-to-back. Those are 2 Western Conference teams that are very much in the same tier as the Memphis Grizzlies in terms of trying to contend. But then it's the All-Star break for a week. And then coming out of that, it is a 3-game roadie against the Indiana Pacers, another back-to-back as they take on the Orlando Magic, and then they head to Cleveland to play the Cavaliers on a Sunday. So that's a 5-game road trip. That counts as a 5-game stretch on the road for the Memphis Grizzlies, and it certainly breaks up their February, right? They play at home on a February 8th, Saturday night, against the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then they're not at home again until the 25th of February. So basically 2 weeks total away from the friendly confines of FedEx Forum. But that is a 5-game road trip that is broken up by the All-Star break itself. So it's really a 2-game road trip and then a 3-game road trip. If you're going to have a roadie trip or a road trip like that, you want to have it in that manner, because they're going to have one in December, taking them through the new year: New Orleans, Oklahoma City, Phoenix, Sacramento, Golden State. There's no breaks in that one. That's a 5-game road trip. Another one in March at Sacramento, at Portland, at LA Clippers, at Utah, at Oklahoma City. That's going to be tough. And that's a really long trip where Memphis is gone for about 12 days. So there's going to be long stretches of road trips. They have 10 games right there that are 5 and then 5, right? The third 5-game road trip is broken up by the All-Star break, and that's going to help them a lot. So I think that is the easiest road trip easily, and that is one that hopefully Memphis can take some advantage of in the times to come. Let me know what you think in terms of easiest stretches. I'm looking at Eastern Conference games against teams that are actively trying to tank. That break of a 5-game road trip stands out to me. Certainly a nice way. If you had to have 3 5-game road trips, that's a nice way to get that done. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, I'm going to talk about some of the more difficult times for Memphis and the schedule that was released this past week. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are some of your non-negotiables? Hopefully you have self-care non-negotiables. Like for me, it's extremely important that I get up every morning and I exercise. I do some sort of run, I walk, I get my mind centered for the day ahead. That's something that I picked up on over the summer. That is a really important piece, not to skip whatever my cardio might look like for that day. It's important to not skip that or therapy day if you choose to go that route. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, work projects, and more, it's easy to let priorities slip. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like something like therapy are more important than ever before. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, the hardest parts to me of Memphis' schedule. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo this time around. No DeMichael Cole. The dynamic duo will ride again on our Wednesday edition of the show. But between my crazy schedule last week and DeMichael helping the commercial appeal there in Memphis wrap up coverage of the golf tournament that was there in Memphis this past weekend, made sense for me to fly solo this time around. We'll be back together on Wednesday. Make sure you're checking out DeMichael's work over the commercial appeal. He does a phenomenal job over there, not just about golf, obviously, but as the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer when the dog days of summer are not actively hampering Grizzlies coverage. DeMichael's, in my opinion, the very best that cover the Memphis Grizzlies, but I am biased since he's my partner. I just talked about the easiest parts of the schedule, the easiest road trip, the easiest games that Memphis has to pick off if they're going to be a top 4 seed in the Western Conference, like DeMichael and I think they can be. Now let's talk about the hardest stretches. And again, remember, more so than opponent, I am looking at stretches of time where there's a lot of travel involved. And this first one, when I saw it upon looking at the schedule, and I also want to shout out Rob Fisher, who does a tremendous job breaking down the schedule in his own right at the Fish Nation. He has tremendous notes on the schedule. It's gotten a lot of retweets and posts, and it should because he does a great job. But when I noticed this, it's what jumped out at me. Again, the travel aspect. So follow me, if you will. The Memphis Grizzlies on January 25th will play the Utah Jazz. That's a home game. So that's in Memphis. Then they travel to New York to play the New York Knicks, and that will be at Madison Square Garden. That's in New York. At home against Houston, at Milwaukee, at home against San Antonio, at Toronto, at home against Oklahoma City, at Phoenix, and then at the Clippers. If you're paying attention, and remember from earlier in the show, I'm going to cut it off there because that Clippers game is the one before the All-Star break, the easy 5-game road trip, right? It's a back-to-back, but it takes them into the All-Star break, and it's just a 2-game road trip. But the point that I'm trying to make, even if you count Memphis as a city that they are in and they live there, right? It's still a different city in terms of travel. So from January 25th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. From January 25th to February 12th, the Memphis Grizzlies will play 9 games in 9 different cities. That's a lot of travel. That's a lot of getting on a plane, getting off a plane. A lot goes into that. Now, thankfully, they have some lighter game schedules in those weeks. The only back-to-back they have is the Phoenix and Clippers one. Other than that, they're playing on a Saturday against Utah, a Monday against the Knicks. They don't play again until Thursday. Then they don't play again until Sunday. So it's almost like the NBA was like, wow, they are going back and forth a lot, right? That's good to see. They're taking that into account and figuring that into their equation maybe, or maybe it was just randomly done. But that's a tough stretch. Even not paying so much attention to the opponent, it's a tough stretch because there's a lot of moving pieces in terms of travel. And we have to remember that these guys are human beings, right? We forget that. I forget that. They have families. They have needs in terms of sleep. They may not travel as well. And obviously during the season, very few people, I guess you could argue baseball players, but very few people travel as much as NBA players, hockey players as well. Their season is different than an NFL player's. They only have 17 games. The NBA has 82, and these guys are going to different cities, going and doing different things all from October all the way into April. So that's an important cog to this, is that travel. And that really jumped out to me looking at that schedule. The long homestand of Phoenix, New York, San Antonio, Atlanta, Oklahoma City. San Antonio and Atlanta don't figure to be as strong as the Memphis Grizzlies, and then you chalk up another win in there among those three, and hopefully that's a 3-2 homestand. There's a homestand at the end of March that goes into the beginning of April that really is probably, in my opinion, the toughest that remains on this Grizzlies schedule. The toughest homestand is a 3-game homestand against the Los Angeles Lakers, the Boston Celtics, and the Golden State Warriors. Holy moly, right? You've got 3 in a row, back-to-back-to-back, 2 at least, title contenders, depending on how high you are on the Lakers. Obviously, Boston is that. And the Boston Golden State games are a back-to-back, a Monday, Tuesday back-to-back there in Memphis, Tennessee, which is going to be extremely challenging for these Grizzlies, especially in the last couple of weeks of the season when they're likely racing for a playoff spot and a playoff seed. So that is their last homestand of the season, and it's against 3 teams that are going to be competing similarly to them. That's extremely difficult. We mentioned earlier that there's other road trips that Memphis is taking. One that really jumps out at me is the first 5-game road trip: New Orleans, Oklahoma City, Phoenix, Sacramento, Golden State. Who's the worst team of those 5? Who's the worst? Let me know in the comments. I think the worst team of those 5 is probably Golden State, and they have the best shooter in the history of basketball on their team, right? So that is an extremely difficult road trip for the Memphis Grizzlies, and I'm not sure how that team is going to handle it. There are so many ways to look at the schedule and say, wow, there are some challenging aspects to this. How they handled their matchup with the Denver Nuggets. They play them back-to-back, 2 games at home. And that Denver series is sandwiched with another Lakers game and another Warriors game and a Philadelphia 76ers game. That's a really difficult 5-game stretch for the Memphis Grizzlies. How they relate and compete in those games is going to matter. And it's going to be connected to their Emirates Cup draw, which I'll talk more about here in a little bit, how I feel about the in-season tournament. If you're an everydayer, you already know that I'm not a huge fan of the in-season tournament. But I feel a little bit differently this year because I think it's going to help us figure out what the Memphis Grizzlies actually are. It's not an easy run. It's a difficult run. Their tournament schedule is going to challenge them and let us see early on who they are as a franchise going into the season. I think that there are more difficult stretches than easy ones, according to the schedule, to be honest with you. They have 3 games against 6 opponents: Denver, the Lakers, and Minnesota, all 3 teams that figure to be in the playoff mix. Then they have the Clippers, the Trailblazers, and Sacramento. So it gets a little bit lighter with Portland. But again, it's not super simple. That's really difficult. The back-to-backs, having so many of them be on the road. 7 road and road back-to-backs. They have 2 of those in October early on, which maybe you sit there and think, Joe, that's a positive. They're going to be fresh in October. Let's knock some of those back-to-backs out early. I don't know if I agree with that because you want to – the continuity is going to matter a lot there. The fact that these guys outside of Zach Edey have essentially played at least some basketball together. They're familiar with one another at this point. You hope that continuity reigns, but that's a lot to play in a short amount of time right there at the jump of the season. So to me, the road trips make it difficult. To me, the Emirates Cup, which we'll talk more about here momentarily, makes it difficult. There's a lot to be nervous about when you look at this Memphis Grizzlies schedule, but you could say that for most Western Conference schedules because the Western Conference is just that loaded. If you're in the West, you're in for a tough night more often than not. Let me know what you think are the toughest times of the season for the Memphis Grizzlies. Do you agree with me on those road trips? Do you agree with me with that 3-game stretch? Lakers, Celtics, and Warriors? Hit me up in the comments. Let me know. Friendly reminder that you can check out after this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, Locked On NBA. Make sure that is your second listen. The great folks over at Locked On NBA do a tremendous job covering all the ins and outs of every aspect of the league, West Coast to East Coast and everywhere in between. Analysis, news, and so much more. Make Locked On NBA your next listen after you finish up with Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to Gametime. It is a blast. I have so much fun. Doesn't matter what kind they are, whether it's professional wrestling, a sporting event, a comedy show. I can't wait to make even more memories as the fall approaches going into the winter. And I plan on using Gametime, especially their 50% off Labor Day offer in certain markets like Diamondbacks, Dodgers. If you're out in the western space of the country, there's so many different spaces that you can take advantage of with these types of deals from Gametime. I love how Gametime has all-in pricing. If you toggle this feature, you have to make sure you turn it on, but it shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and has the lowest ticket price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and any event tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. When we return, I talk about why I may have softened my stance on the Emirates Cup, the in-season tournament, being one of the dumbest things in the NBA. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, finishing up this episode of the show. Thank you so much for being with me as I fly solo after a couple episodes away. To Michael Cole will be back with us on Wednesday. Excited for the dynamic duo to ride once more. As we close up this Monday show, I've talked about the easy and the hard of the regular season schedule. And to me, because Memphis is in the Western Conference, it's kind of an easy answer and cop-out. The schedule is extremely difficult because they play a majority Western Conference teams, understandably so, right? Portland, San Antonio, maybe those teams are down a little bit, but a vast majority of the West is competing for some postseason possibilities, whereas in the Eastern Conference, you still have the Charlotte Hornets, you have the Brooklyn Nets, you have the Washington Wizards. There's just more teams that figure to not be in that mix, right? In the Emirates Cup, which is what they're calling the in-season tournament, and I want to stress, I was a pretty big hater of the in-season tournament when it first began last year, and I still am a hater of it overall. I really am. I think that it's silly to try to make these games mean more. They are important games because they're regular season games that contribute to playoff seeding. I guess I appreciate the effort, for effort. I'm not a huge fan of the way they've done the uniforms and the court, and maybe that makes me just a Debbie Downer. You can make fun of me in the comments if you want. I didn't particularly enjoy the in-season tournament. I didn't like it. Oh, and by the way, the team that won the in-season tournament, the Los Angeles Lakers, fired their head coach. So obviously winning the in-season tournament doesn't mean all that much in terms of success. And they went the route of a completely inexperienced person in J.J. Redick as opposed to the guy that they had, who helped them win the in-season tournament. How much does it matter? But I digress. Memphis got the group of death in the Western Conference, and I would argue the group of death overall in terms of the Emirates NBA Cup. Out west, you have three groupings: West A, West B, West C, and Memphis is in West C. They have to deal with the Denver Nuggets, the Dallas Mavericks, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Golden State Warriors. Not a tanker, not a bad team among them. West B has the Spurs and the Jazz. West A has the Trailblazers. In the East, there's East A that has Brooklyn and Charlotte. There's East B that has Toronto and Detroit. There's East C that has the Washington Wizards. There is only one bracket across the entire NBA Cup that has no tankers, and it is West C. So Memphis is in that group of death. That's a good thing. And it makes me more excited about the NBA Cup, okay? Not because I think that the court's going to look cool, and not because I'm excited for whatever god-awful uniform decisions they make to try to make this thing seem different. Again, I appreciate the effort. I am excited about this NBA in-season tournament, Emirates Cup, whatever you want to call it, because of the competition happening so early in the year, right? These games get started essentially November 12th. So that's 3 weeks or so into the season, we start seeing these kinds of basketball games. And they play those games on designated cup nights, right? Going all the way into December 3rd. So for a few weeks, it's not every night, but there are designated cup nights in the schedule of November and December, right there in the peak of football season. There, the games maybe mean a little bit more depending on how much you care about the NBA Cup, sponsored by Emirates. Now, if you are somebody that doesn't make the money that John Morant, Desmond Bain, Jaren Jackson Jr. makes, you probably care a lot more about the NBA Cup because there are cash rewards and incentives attached to winning these games and winning this tournament. But the actual winning of the tournament itself, for me, is not as important as how they compete in these types of environments, in these types of games against teams that, again, Pelicans, Warriors, Mavericks, Nuggets, these are who the Grizzlies are chasing in the Western Conference. These are who Memphis is trying to supplant as they get back into contender status. If they cannot hang in these contests, maybe they are not as close to being a contender out west as we thought. And we will get that answer by early December. If you're an everydayer of Locked On Grizzlies, if you followed my blogging career going back to 2013, it's like clockwork. Around 3 months or so from now, I'm going to start using the hashtag on X. Follow me there at Joe Mullinax. Hashtag call me at Christmas. I am Mr. Call Me at Christmas. I am the guy that says, I don't care what happens in the first 2 weeks of the regular season. It just got started. Where are we at going into the Christmas holiday? That is when I start worrying about the standings. The NBA Cup might be able to accelerate that a little bit this year because you have such strong competition against teams that are going to be in similar boats to you. If Memphis wants to be a 2 seed in the Western Conference, the Denver Nuggets are going to have to be a team they supplant, that they get past. If Memphis just wants to be a postseason team, I think they have higher aspirations, but the Pelicans and the Warriors, obviously the Dallas Mavericks, who made the NBA Finals last year, these are squads that they're going to have to combat. These games matter more so than just for some trophy that they decided to try to make mean something. It even matters more than making extra money for those end-of-the-bench guys. This matters in terms of how good are the Memphis Grizzlies really. We get a window into that in significant contests that lend themselves to more competition because if you don't do well enough in group stages, you don't make the knockout rounds. And then you get games added to your schedule that make it all make sense. 2 games, I think. But the Grizzlies, if they make the knockout round coming out of the group of death, maybe they are a contender in the Western Conference. Maybe they are a team to be reckoned with. This could be an easy way to announce that Memphis has returned. They are back to where they were a couple of years ago. It's an early opportunity to see what exactly these Grizzlies are made of, what Zach Edey is made of, what Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams Jr. in roles that are different than what they did this past season to earn the contracts that they signed. This is going to be a good opportunity. So as much as I hate the Emirates Cup still, the NBA Cup, sponsored by Emirates, as much as I still don't like how they're trying to make this a thing, I do like how it's shaken out for Memphis this year because it provides an opportunity for us to see, even before the Christmas holiday, just where the Memphis Grizzlies stand, what kind of moves they may need to make, how Taylor Jenkins is adjusting and hopefully thriving. But if he's not, people talk about Taylor Jenkins being on the hot seat. Maybe that seat gets a little bit warmer if they don't have a good performance in the NBA Cup, sponsored by Emirates. Let me know in the comments how you're feeling about that. Maybe you like the in-season tournament a lot more than I do. Try to convince me. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Let me know if I'm right, wrong, and different. How you feel about where Memphis stands in the in-season tournament, because I know DeMichael has a different feeling about it than me. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I truly, wherever you get podcasts, we are free and available as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Wherever you get podcasts, you can check us out. Cole will also be back with me. We'll continue to trek through the dog days of the offseason. I look forward to talking Memphis Grizzlies basketball once again with DeMichael, and I look forward to talking with you once more later on this week on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you again. I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts. It is appreciated that you are part of this, making us a part each and every time an episode drops. Stay locked in. We'll catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies.